The fastest way to load a lot of data in MonetDB database is to use CSV files. CSV files are faster than insert into because insert into always have to be parsed. Also, insert into can only use one CPU thread, while if we import data from CSV files, we can use the whole CPU. For inserting data from CSV file, we have to use copy into statement, and this statement will work only if we have appropriate privilege. So I will log in as administrator. My password is MonetDB, and then I will create one sample table. This is a simple table with 3 columns, and then we will insert some data in this table. We can see that data here, so we are going to insert these 4 lines. I will copy them, I will paste them inside of this other file, and I will save this other file. We can notice here several things. First, this CSV file has UTF-8 encoding, and only that encoding is acceptable. Next, the ending of lines is line feed. A separator between columns is comma, and our strings are wrapped inside of double quotes. I will now go back to terminal, and here I will paste my copy into statement. This is my copy into statement. Here I'm using offset to subclose. That means that I'm skipping the first row because in the first row we have header. We don't need header. Then we have our table and its columns. Then on our server we have this CSV file with these columns, and we are using these delimiters. We are using comma as a column separator, line feed as a row separator, and we are using double quote as a wrapper around strings. I will now run this statement, and then we can read from our table, and we will see whether we have successfully loaded data in our table from CSV file. So this is our result. I will now clean my screen. Before next example, I will empty my table. I will use truncate statement for that, and this means that I'm going to delete all of the records inside of my table. And then I will try this next copy into statement. This copy into statement is also skipping header, but we are going to read only 2 records. If we know in advance how many records do we have, we should declare that because that will speed up Monet. Also here I haven't declared column names because I have the same columns in my CSV file and in my table. I only have declared separator for columns because in my file I'm using line feed as a delimiter for rows. If I'm using line feed or carriage return and line feed, then those are default. So I don't have to declare them as delimiters between rows. Also, I haven't declared string wrappers, and because of that, those double quotes will become part of my strings. So I will run this statement, and then we can read from our table, and we will see 2 things. We will see that we only have 2 rows because we only read 2 records, and our double quotes are now part of our strings. Like previously, I will now delete all of my records, and then I will try this next copy into statement. This time I want to import only 1 column, but my CSV file has 3 columns, so I will change their names to dummy and dummy2, so I can only import this column number. I will run this statement, and then I will read from my table. So only 1 column will be imported, column number. This column letter has a default value, so it is filled with letter Z, and this column doesn't have default value, so it will be empty. I will now clean my screen. For the next example, I will make some changes. I will go here to this text editor, to this first file, and from here I will copy this data here. And I will paste it inside of this file that we are using for import. And here we can notice some changes. Now we have a new column, so we have 4 columns. Then column number is now before column letter, so I have switched their positions. At the end, we have line feed, but I will change that. I will use carriage return in line feed, which is a standard on Windows. We are using semicolon as a separator between columns, and no more do I have those double quotes around strings. I will save this file. I will go back to terminal, and I will first delete all of my records. And then I will try to read this new data, and for that I will use this statement. Here we can see how we can reorder our columns. So instead of having number and letter, we can import those columns as first letter and then number, and this will work. I will run this, and then we can read from our table to see that this is working. And we can also notice that here I'm using a symbol for line feed, but this symbol will also work for carriage return and line feed. Next, I will again delete all of my records, and then we will try to import this data again. But I will use this other statement, and this statement doesn't have declaration for columns for CSV file. Now I'm trying to import only 2 columns, but Monet knows that this table has 3 columns. And then it will assume that this CSV file also has 3 columns, but as we saw earlier, this CSV file has 4 columns. So this will not work. Monet will not allow us to execute this statement. If I run it, it will send us a message that we have 1 more column, so that this is leftover column, and it will not accept a statement like this one. I will now clear my screen. I will now again change my data. I will go to text editor to this first file, and I will copy these 3 rows that are using pipes as separator between columns. And in this first row, we now have only 3 pipes. We also have this 4th pipe at the end, and we are not using header. So I will copy all of this. I will go to this working file. I will paste it here. And I will also change my line ending to line feed, and I will save this file. Then I will go back to terminal, and I will run my statement. And this statement will only read 2 records. We don't have to skip header because we do not have header. And also notice that we are using all of the default delimiters. And because of that, we don't need using close. So there is no using close. I will run this statement. It is successful. We can then read from our table. And we can notice that everything is working. Now we had that pipe at the end, but that pipe at the end didn't make any problems. Next, I will again empty my table. And I will also again change my data. I will go to this first file, and I will copy this data here. We are now using dot as a separator between columns, but because dot is also a decimal point, then we have to place an escape sign before it. And our escape sign is backslash. So I will copy these 3 rows. I will paste them inside of our working file. I will save this file. I will go back to terminal, and then I will run my statement. And this time we can see that we are using dot as a separator. So I will run it. This is successful, and we can read from this table, and we will notice that everything is fine. I will then delete my records, and I will clean my screen. I will again change my data. I will go to text editor to this first file, and I will copy these 3 rows. This time we have a double quote inside of our string, so we have to escape it, and we can escape it by using double quotes, or we can use backslash as escape sign before our double quote. Here I'm using null, and this null will be considered as a literal null. So I will copy these 3 rows. I will place them here in the working file, and I will save it. And then we can run our statement. So we will go to terminal. This is my statement. I will run it, and then we can read from our table, and we will notice that everything is working. This is our null, and we have a double quote inside of our string. We also got 3 rows because I have used offset 0. Offset 0 or offset 1 means that we are going to use everything from the start, so we are not skipping any rows. I will now again empty my table, and then I will again change my date. We'll go to text editor, to this first file, and I will copy this data here. I now want to use backslash as a literal sign, and I also want to use empty string as a representation for null. So I will copy this data here. I will go to my working file. I will paste it here, and I will save this file. I will go back to terminal, and then I will run my statement. This is my statement. Here I'm using no escape subclause. That means that my backslash will be considered as a literal sign, and I'm also using null as empty string. So this is how I can declare how my null will be presented. I will run this, and then again we can read from our table, and again we will see our null, and now we can see our backslash, so it will not be considered as an escape sign. I will again empty my table, and I will clean my screen. It is also possible to read CSV files that don't have separators, but they have columns of the fixed width. I will now jump to this text editor to show you one such CSV file. So look at this. Here we have 3 columns. The first column has 4 characters, second column has 7 characters, and we need 10 characters for this date. So this will be our CSV file. I will copy this, I will place it inside of our working file, and I will save this file. I will go back to terminal, and then I will run my statement. This is my statement. At the end I have this subclause FWF, and then I have to declare how much each column is wide. So we have a column with 4 characters, with 7 characters, and with 10 characters. I will run this statement. We can now read from our table, and we can notice that all of those spaces are removed, and only values are entered into our table. I will now again delete all of the records, and I will clean my screen. Let's assume that our CSV file has some error. I will go here to this text editor, to the first file, and here I have these 3 rows. But in the second column I have letter W, and this is an error because this column should be number column. I will copy these 3 rows, I will paste them inside of my working file, and I will save it. I will then go back to terminal, and then I will run my statement. I will run this statement, and we can see that we will get an error message because of this W letter. Now this could be a big problem if we have a really big CSV file and only one error, but nothing will be loaded. So what to do in this case? Well, we have to make a modification of our statement. We should add best effort subclause. So here I have add best effort, and that means that we will insert everything that could be inserted. So I will run this, and only 2 rows will be loaded. So if we go to our file, we can see that first row will be loaded and the third row will be loaded. We can see that better if we read from our table. So I will read from my table, and we can see only the first and the third row. But which row is not loaded? How to find that? Well, for that we can read from one system table. That system table is sys.rejects. I will run this, and here we will find our error messages. So we will see that second row was not imported. Now this table will save its content until the end of session, or until we call this procedure. So if we call this procedure, then this table will be emptied. So if we read from it again, there will be no content in it. So now it's empty, and I will also delete all of the records from our main table. I will run this, and then I will clean my screen. Next, I will show you something different. I will go here to text editor, and I will show you this CSV file here. Beside it, we also have this second CSV file and this third CSV file. And these three files, they have the same structure. Now we can read from all of these three CSV files at once by using only one statement. I will go back to terminal and I will paste my statement there. So this is my statement. And we can see here that I'm referencing the first file, the second file, and the third file. From each file, I will read only one record, and that will not be the first record but the second one, because we are going to skip the first one. So from this first file, I will read only this record. From the second file, I will only read this record, and from the third file, I will also read only the second record. So in total, I will read 3 records. So I will run this statement, and then I can read from my table to see those 3 records. So we have 3 records from our 3 tables. Again, I will remove all of the records from my table, and I will clean my screen. Till now, we have always used CSV files that are placed on the server. So all of these CSV files are on the same computer as Monet. But it is also possible to load CSV files that are on the client computer, but for that we have to use some programming language. And I will use Python, so I will go here to Spider, and I will paste here my procedure. And this is a simple procedure. We will first create a connection to our Monet database. We will designate one folder as a save folder, and we will tell that from that folder it is safe to upload CSV file. So this is a folder on the client computer. Then we will create a cursor, and then we will execute our statement. And this is just normal copy into statement. Just instead of on server, we will use on client. Then we will commit our statement and we will close everything. I will now run this procedure, and then I will go back to terminal and I will execute select query to see whether we have successfully loaded some data, and we were successful.